A Norman arrow strikes King Harold's helmet at Hastings and glances off. It is October 14th, 1066, late in the afternoon of one of the most consequential battles in European history. The Saxon shield wall has held for nearly 9 hours atop Senlac Hill, absorbing charge after charge from William of Normandy's cavalry, weathering volleys from his archers, refusing to break. Harold Godwinson, King of England since January, stands at the center of that wall, surrounded by his housecarls, the elite household warriors who have marched 250 miles in 2 weeks, fresh from destroying a Norwegian invasion at Stamford Bridge, and who now face a second existential threat from across the English Channel. In our history, the arrow found its mark. Harold fell. The wall shattered. England was remade. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. But what if the arrow that changed everything had simply been an inch to the left? What no one standing on that blood-soaked hill could have known. What wouldn't become clear for centuries was that this single moment would determine the language you're hearing right now, the legal system governing half the world, and the entire trajectory of Western civilization. The high volley comes in the failing light. An iron-tipped shaft catches Harold's helmet above the brow, scoring a gash across his forehead but deflecting off the metal rim. He staggers. Blood pours into his eyes. His housecarls close ranks, shields locking together. A roar goes up from the Saxon line. The king still stands, and as dusk gathers over Senlac Hill, the shield wall that historically fractured holds firm. William's army is spent. His cavalry has charged uphill into a wall of shields and axes for the better part of a day. His feigned retreats, the tactic that historically lured undisciplined segments of the Saxon third out of formation, have gained him nothing against a line that refuses to pursue. The Norman infantry are exhausted. The archers have emptied their quivers. As twilight descends, the retreat begins. It is orderly at first, then ragged, then something worse. The marshy ground behind the Norman positions, the same boggy terrain that had channeled the approach, now becomes a killing ground. Saxon housecarls surge downhill for the first time all day, axes rising and falling in the half-dark. William's horse is killed beneath him, the third mount he has lost today. He stumbles through the mire on foot, his standard lost, his identity obscured by mud and blood. Saxon warriors seize him before he can reach the coast. He does not go quietly. Bishop Odo of Bayeux, William's half-brother, escapes with a remnant of cavalry. Eustace of Boulogne, commanding what remains of the Norman right flank, fights free and reaches the ships at Pevensey. But the invasion is over. The Duke of Normandy, who crossed the Channel to claim a crown, is now a prisoner of the man who wears it. Harold Godwinson enters London as no English king has entered it since Alfred. He has defeated 2 invasions in 3 weeks. The Norwegian host at Stamford Bridge on September 25th, the Norman army at Hastings less than 3 weeks later. The Witan Triumphant, the Council of England's leading nobles and churchmen, confirms his kingship with an authority that no lord in the realm can question. The man who was elected king in January has now proven himself one by the oldest measure there is. William is held in comfortable captivity, as befits his rank. He is a duke, a cousin of kings, and the customs of the age demand that he be treated accordingly, but comfortable captivity is captivity nonetheless. Harold sends envoys to Normandy with a simple message: recognize the English throne, negotiate terms, or your duke remains in England indefinitely. The Norman fleet at Pevensey, leaderless and stranded, is seized. English crews sail the captured vessels around to the Thames. For the first time in a generation, England possesses a meaningful naval force, built, ironically, by its enemies. The consequences of this windfall would reshape English strategy for decades. But first, there was the matter of ransom. The negotiations take months. Normandy without William is a duchy in crisis. His barons quarrel. The Count of Anjou presses claims along the southern border. Maine, always restive under Norman control, senses opportunity. The regions William left behind have neither his authority nor his ruthlessness. The terms, when they come, are severe. William formally renounces all claim to the English throne, his claim and the claim of his heirs in perpetuity. The English hostages taken during Harold's controversial visit to Normandy in 1064, the visit that William insisted had produced an oath of fealty, are returned. A massive payment in silver crosses the channel, and William goes home. He returns to a duchy diminished. The flower of Norman chivalry bled out on Senlac Hill or drowned in the marshes behind it. The prestige that had drawn knights from Brittany, Flanders, and beyond to his banner is gone. William spends his remaining years fighting to hold what he already has, suppressing rebellions in Maine, fending off Angevin encroachment, managing vassals who now see a duke who gambled everything and lost. Normandy turns inward. The explosive outward energy that historically produced not only the conquest of England, but Norman kingdoms in Sicily and the Holy Land is dampened, redirected, consumed by continental rivalries that have no resolution. One of the most profound consequences of the Norman Conquest was the wholesale transformation of the English Church. William replaced nearly every English bishop and abbot with Norman appointees, binding the Church to Rome's reform movement and to Norman political interests simultaneously. Without the conquest, none of this occurs. Archbishop Stigand remains in Canterbury. He is a controversial figure. Rome has long questioned the legitimacy of his appointment, and reformist clergy across Europe view him as a symbol of the English Church's irregularities. But Stigand is Harold's ally, and Harold is now unassailable. Rome presses for his removal. It has no army to enforce the demand. The English Church retains its distinctive character. Its vernacular traditions persist, the Old English homilies, the translations of Scripture, the liturgical practices that set it apart from continental norms. The tight integration with papal reform movements that the Normans historically imposed never takes hold. England's church remains more insular, more English, more rooted in its own soil. Whether this is a strength or a vulnerability depends entirely on what comes next. This is perhaps the change that echoes loudest across the centuries. In our history, the Norman Conquest imposed a French-speaking ruling class over an English-speaking population. For nearly 300 years, the language of the court, the law, and the church in England was Norman French. The English language survived, but it was transformed beyond recognition, absorbing thousands of French and Latin words, shedding its Germanic grammatical complexity, becoming the hybrid tongue we speak today. None of that happens here. Old English remains the language of power. Legal documents are drafted in English. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which historically fell silent within a generation of the conquest, continues as a living record. The great works of English prose and poetry develop along Germanic lines, drawing from Scandinavian and Low German influences rather than from French. The language that emerges by the 12th and 13th centuries is something no modern English speaker would recognize. It is denser, more inflected, closer to its cousins across the North Sea than to the Romance languages of the South. The vast vocabulary that English historically borrowed from French, words like justice, parliament, sovereign, nation, either never arrives or arrives centuries later as foreign borrowings rather than native inheritance. And then came the question that would define everything that followed: what kind of nation does this different language produce? Harold II rules England for 2 decades after Hastings. They are not easy decades. The pressures that defined late Anglo-Saxon kingship do not vanish because one battle went differently. Scandinavian threats persist. The kings of Denmark and Norway eye England with the same ambition that drove Harald Hardrada's invasion. Welsh princes raid the border marches. Powerful earls, the Godwinsons among them, must be managed, rewarded, and restrained. Harold strengthens the Burh system, the network of fortified towns that has been England's primary defense since Alfred's day. He rebuilds and expands the Fyrd, the militia system that put an army on Senlac Hill. The captured Norman ships form the nucleus of a royal fleet, modest but functional, patrolling the Channel and the North Sea. He navigates succession carefully. His sons are elevated, given earldoms, married into powerful families. The Godwinson dynasty consolidates its hold on England in the way English royal houses always have, through patronage, marriage, and the careful distribution of land. England under Harold remains a North Sea power, its gaze turned toward Scandinavia and the Baltic trade routes rather than toward France. It is a kingdom that builds on what it already is, rather than being remade into something foreign. By the 12th century, the England that emerges from Harold's survival is a nation that its historical counterpart would barely recognize. There is no Domesday Book. That extraordinary survey of English land and wealth was a tool of Norman administration, and the Saxons have no need for it. There is no Tower of London, no network of Norman castles imposed on a conquered population. The common law that historically descends from Norman legal traditions develops differently or not at all, replaced by an evolution of Anglo-Saxon legal customs, the Hundred Courts, the Shire Courts, the codes that stretch back to Aethelbert of Kent. England's ties to France are commercial, not dynastic. There are no Plantagenets, no Angevin Empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. There is no 100 Years' War, no Agincourt, no Joan of Arc rallying France against an English king who claims its throne. Scotland and Wales face a neighbour that expands more slowly, perhaps not at all, its energies directed northward and eastward across the sea rather than into the Celtic lands. The nation that emerges is not better. It is not worse. It is simply profoundly different. An island kingdom that speaks a Germanic tongue, worships in its own fashion, governs by its own ancient customs, and faces the wider world carrying institutions and traditions that William the Conqueror never had the chance to destroy. All because an arrow struck iron instead of flesh, and a shield wall held until dark.